Welcome to AccountingWEB's Brexit panel discussion. I'm Tom Herbert, the business editor of AccountingWEB. It's been a week since the momentous vote to leave the EU, and there have been a lot of questions raised about the tax implications of this. In this section, we're going to talk to our managing editor, Lovell, and our practice correspondent, Francois Badenhorst. Thank you both for coming. Rob, I'm going to start with you. There's been a lot of concern and uncertainty around the tax environment that this vote will leave. What are the short-term implications of Brexit for the tax system?
Sure. As you mentioned, in the last week, we've seen so much turmoil and upheaval in the business and tax market. So there was originally word that we were going to have a kind of emergency budget after the referendum result if it went this way, but we're now looking at that actually happening probably more towards October time. We've put on ice about 40 different pieces of tax legislation in between the referendum and now. We're expecting some of those to start coming through. For example, making tax digital, all the consultation papers around that, which I'm sure Francois is going to go into a bit more detail shortly. But we're expecting those pretty imminently. And then the rest of all the other consultations and tax legislation going through, we're looking probably towards the end of this year and throughout 2017. So a lot of upheaval and a lot to think about what could happen, a lot of uncertainty.
So delays, though, rather than changes, you think?
Yeah, delays. I mean, it's probably worth also just communicating some of this to your clients. This is a great opportunity to reconnect with them and to reassure them. Obviously, a lot of small businesses are going to be very concerned about what's happening. So it's a great chance to get in touch with your clients and have that voice of calm and reassurance to help them through and explain what is happening as the months go forward this year.
Yeah, so one thing that's fundamentally tied up with our membership of the EU is VAT. Could you talk a little bit about how this may be affected?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, VAT is obviously it brings in a huge amount of tax for the UK government. I think it's the third biggest in terms of our tax take. So obviously it will continue in some form. It's obviously it's sort of underpinned by European law. So on the moment of Brexit, whenever that is, in sort of 2 years' time, or whenever it's Article 50 is enacted, we would look to bring our own sort of version of that forward and continue to have a VAT type tax of our own.
So yeah, one thing that has been a massive government initiative over the last year or two is the government's making tax digital plans. Francois, can you talk to us a little bit about how leaving the EU may affect this?
So, as much as making tax digital has been talked about a lot, it still remains a very kind of mysterious change of legislation and change of tax policy, mostly because we haven't seen the consultation documents. Now that in itself is probably the central problem with what's going to happen now. The consultation documents were originally intended to be released before Christmas. That was initially delayed, and then we had the Panama Papers storm, and then with the government put a locking down pretty much every government department until after the Brexit vote, and then we had the pretty seismic shock of the vote going towards leave. So we already had an excellent 6-month delay, and now we were expecting to see the consultation documents this week, and they've probably been pushed another 2 or 3 weeks. 2 or 3 weeks doesn't sound like a lot in a vacuum, but on top of an already pretty substantial delay, it really does add on. So the issue is that once these documents are released, and that's when we really are going to see the meaty details of what this thing is. 12-week consultation period, then we're already into autumn, and HMRC has given no sign of amending its very, very ambitious timeline, even if they had released the documents initially in December. So what we can expect is delays. And I think, to be honest, many AccountingWEB members would welcome that.
Yeah, I realise this is a difficult question to answer, given that we haven't seen the consultation document, but would you expect HMRC to have made any changes to the consultation, or to make changes to the consultation documents based on this decision to leave?
Well, speaking to Rebecca Badenhorst, who is on the digital advisory panel, the consultation documents are ready. They've already been written, and they're very, very substantial in size. So I don't think they can be amended now already. They would probably have to be amended, especially once Article 50 is triggered, because that might have all kinds of implications for tax law and just law in general, and how this country is governed. Another fundamental issue is HMRC's manpower problem. I mean, we write about it on AccountingWEB frequently. The tax authority has just been gutted in terms of the amount of employees that it has. That makes it pretty inflexible for any kinds of seismic shocks, which is what Brexit was, to put it very lightly.
Yeah. Picking up on a point you made just then, so when, or perhaps if, Article 50 is actually triggered, what effect do you think this will have on the tax system in general? Is the whole thing going to have to be rejigged?
Well, I mean, we're talking about the UK's integration into the European project is a 30 to 40 year process that has kind of been, been going and going, and the integration has been very, very tight in all kinds of respects. So we're talking about a very, very complicated untangling, and we're talking about a very big project, Making Tax Digital, which was designed and thought out and conceived in very different circumstances.
Thanks, Francois. So moving back to you, Rob, we talked a little bit about the short-term implications for the tax system. Can you see any long-term implications that this vote's going to have?
Yeah, it really depends on what kind of government we end up getting going forward into the Brexit negotiations, and how those negotiations go. I can imagine something like corporation tax will remain at the low level that it currently is, if not lower, to keep those businesses within the UK. There are fears of an exodus of big businesses. Following this, I know that's sort of starting to trickle through. There's signs of that already, but I'm sure whichever government we have then will be negotiating to keep them there and provide whatever tax incentives they can possibly throw at them to keep them stable and staying in the UK.
Yeah, so you've mentioned one of the advantages or potential advantages for the UK of leaving the EU in terms of tax, corporation tax, so could be seen as the ability to attract more foreign investment by reducing the rate still further. Can you think of any other advantages?
Yeah, there's a lot of talk around tax simplification. The Office of Tax Simplification it's been going for a few years now, and the UK tax system is very complicated, and any opportunities to try and simplify it and streamline it, we should really be grasping those opportunities that emerge, and if that means sort of shedding some of the rules and regulations that we have from the EU and tax code that we no longer need, then that's could potentially be a positive outcome in the long term, that we actually end up with a more streamlined, simple tax system.
Great, thanks, Rob. And for the balance to the advantages, Francois, what disadvantages are people talking in terms of tax?
Well, the big disadvantage really is a political one for me. Rob kind of touched on it, where the next government has a big task in its hand to try and convince and to try and shore up business confidence in this country. I would worry whether that kind of very politically cautious environment is a good environment to try and implement very, very radical tax changes. Like I say, we don't know much exactly about what MTD is, mostly because it's been so hamstrung and delayed. I would just worry that a Treasury that's cautious at the best of times, and that's probably going to increase exponentially now that that Brexit has happened. It could really, really hamstring what is a very ambitious project, even if things were smooth sailing. So, yeah, it's interesting times.
Francois, Rob, thank you very much. So a lot of questions there, not too many answers emerging at this stage, but here on AccountingWEB we'll be trying to do our best to keep you up to date with that. For now, thanks very much for watching and goodbye.